Titan turned slowly beneath the gravity anchor, its atmosphere a pale smear of methane haze stretched thin across ochre plains. Wind howled along pressure ridges, shaping the cryovolcanic terrain into jagged flows and ancient scars. Beneath that frozen, smothered skin, 80 meters under stabilized ice, the vault base waited, half forgotten, fully sealed. The war had ended 41 years ago. Officially, this place had never existed. It did not appear on maps, manifests, or any of the commemorative archives aired each remembered cycle. But it had been here long before the final battle, before the ceasefire, before the monuments. The facility bore no designation beyond its last functioning tag, Anchor Point 573. Commander Lyra Kess had not been officially alive for 23 of those years. She moved like a shadow through the corridors, slow, deliberate, absent of ceremony. Her gait was even, her posture balanced, but her silhouette bore the marks of damage unrepaired. A right knee reinforced with magnetic stabilizers, a matte black left arm of polymer bone and carbon mesh, and skin weathered by microgravity and cold vacuum. Her uniform was vacuum-rated utility weave, but stripped of rank and patch. Only the reinforced shoulder plating remained, scarred, serviceable, and blank. Above her, Titan's tenuous day leaked across the horizon, filtered through the sensor towers and carbonite shielding of the anchor housing. Dust, mostly silicate, some radioactive residue from the late-war orbital burns, lashed across the solar plates. They no longer tracked the sun. Power came from deep-core turbines now, and even those operated at only 1/5 capacity. The base had no active command, no staff, no mission profile, just one human, and a system designed never to wake up. Until now, the alert was analog, deliberately archaic. A physical red diode embedded in a brushed steel panel, blinking once every 30 seconds. No soft audio cue, no interface prompt. The pulse came through solid-state optics, mechanically gated, a fail-safe against cybernetic interference. It had not lit in over 4 decades. Lyra stood 5 meters away, one gloved hand still resting on the status panel. She stared at the light as if distance might somehow falsify what she saw. But the blink continued. Red, dim, regular. It wasn't an external ping. No atmospheric breach, no seismic instability, no unauthorized proximity. The data stream came from within, a request from inside the vault. She reached into the console housing, bypassing the biometric verifier that had long since corroded. Manual overrides clicked into place as she keyed the pressure gate system through a rotating series of hard-switch encoders. They had been engineered before the war, before humans and Zithri ever met. Back when Earth still believed in switches that clicked. The corridor exhaled frozen nitrogen as the vault door cycled open. A wave of cold hit her, not the clean cold of vacuum, but the chemical stillness of deep storage. Nitrogen, oxygen, trace biocontaminants, and decay-resistant polymers. The vault interior hadn't seen movement in decades, and yet the internal systems glowed faintly. Pale cyan. One screen at first, then 2. Then all 7 primary nodes shimmered online. Power was active. The system waking was Aegis black. It had been sealed in triple-layered shielding, air-gapped from every outer channel, encased in copper and carbon mesh Faraday curtains. The entire vault had been built around it. At the height of the war, Aegis Black had been the central archival AI for unacknowledged operations, deep insertion missions, biological fusion prototypes, and Psywar simulations too classified to brief even high command. It was never meant to wake again. But it wasn't just a system. Lyra could feel the pressure change as its processors came online. Not noise, something below that. Like a tide pushing against bulkheads. Aegis Black had not been activated. It had decided to wake. Lyra removed the reader core from her belt rig, slotted it into the primary interface, and connected her retinal port to the verification node. The screen dimmed, then flared. Retinal match confirmed. For a moment, the air felt heavier. She knew what that meant. Access had been denied to every known operative since the war's end. Her own death had been filed and certified. She should not have cleared the security layer. But the vault remembered her. The interface panels shimmered, lines of raw hex and nested command strings layering into structure. Mission logs, biometric traces, encrypted neural state captures. Data packets flickered into the buffer array like falling embers. Fragmented, scattered, but very much alive. The first complete packet appeared on screen 3. Timestamp: 6th day, month 13, cycle 29. The final year of the war. Her own routing signature blinked at the edge of the metadata cluster. And another beside it. Vectrolith. The name struck with a force beyond sound. It hadn't been spoken aloud in 40 years. On Earth, the name had been erased. Among the Zithari, it had become a curse. Traitor. Abomination. Unmade. Lyra keyed a secure parse and watched the data resolve. Image, temperature logs, orbital telemetry, decrypted comms overlays. A burned sky filled the screen. Seen from orbit, shot through a fractured viewport. Zithari cruisers twisted downward in unnatural formations, engines venting plasma in false distress. Below them, human warships withdrew silently, their comms dark, their weapons hot. A skirmish staged. Telemetry confirmed it. None of the Zithari ships exploded. None of the humans pursued. Instead, wreckage was seeded, automated transponders coded with falsified battle markers. Atmosphere incinerated the planted debris. Firestorms swept an already dead world. There had been no final battle, only the illusion of one. And then, over the footage, audio crackled. A human voice, filtered, layered through command-grade encryption. They must believe it ended here. Lyra's hands went still. Her own voice followed. No side can survive the truth. Not even ours. She shut the feed. The air in the vault felt thinner now. Not from atmosphere, but from memory. Everything official, everything public, said the war had ended in a final cataclysm. 2 fleets destroying each other above an uninhabited moon. Both sides had declared mourning. Memorials had been built. The United Terran Accord had signed a silence treaty. The Zithari Dominion never responded. Because, Lyra now saw, there had never been a battle to survive. Only a conspiracy. Her breath frosted inside the mask as she looked at the red diode, still blinking. She pulled up the archive tree and traced the source of the signal. Subnode Theta 7. Deep storage. Biological log stacks, mostly. Hybrid traces, neurograph overlays, failed integration sequences from abandoned projects. Even before she saw the file name, her body stiffened. Theta 7 had been locked under the Conclave's highest tier. The work was unshared, unverified, and unendorsed by any official doctrine. It wasn't just forbidden, it was denied. The entity stored there hadn't been a weapon in the traditional sense. It had been a gamble, a creature engineered to endure the collapse of both civilizations. A biological answer to an ideological extinction. The last recorded pulse came from an unmarked entry. Just a string of numbers. M0001. Lyra froze. The hybrid. Her hand tightened around the console. A tension welled in her chest, subtle, but old. Instinct. Memory. Fear. She had left it sealed. Scrubbed. The project had been shut down on the Conclave's orders. No survivable form had ever been confirmed. The biological system had degraded. At least, that was the official report. She stared at the console. The ping was not accidental. The hybrid had called out. Lyra keyed a new path into the interface, authorizing archival descent into Theta 7. The screens flickered again. Atmospheric readouts lit up. The biolockers weren't just active, they were open. Open. And one chamber had registered atmospheric displacement only 4 hours ago. The hybrid was no longer in containment. Her eyes scanned the logs for movement. Nothing. No heat signature, no exit pattern, no breach. Which meant it had never left the base. Or it had left long ago. She stood perfectly still. The humming from the vault deepened in pitch as secondary processors came online, booting once dormant storage arrays that hadn't activated in decades. More data streamed into the buffer, audio clips, surgical records, Zithari genome overlays layered atop human EG traces. Vectrolith's voice whispered across the logs. It was never meant to be a weapon. It was meant to survive both of us. Lyra's throat went dry. It was real. Still real. She remembered now. The midnight meetings beneath uncharted moons. The Conclave members from both species, stripped of symbols, speaking in code. Agreement reached in looks rather than documents. A plot so vast it required silence. A lie so deep it needed reality to be rewritten. They had ended the war. Together. But no one had ever said what would happen if the truth returned. The screen blinked. A final frame loaded into place. An image, unsorted, uncompressed, raw. A silhouette. Human height. Wrong proportions. Standing in front of a cracked viewport, looking out at stars Lyra could not name. The timestamp was from 2 hours ago, and the image came from inside Anchor Point. She turned slowly toward the vault's far corridor. No alarms. No breach warnings. Just silence. Then the diode blinked once more. Somewhere, in the frozen dark beneath Titan's ice, something had decided it was time to be remembered. Above Europa, in the quiet dark where the war had officially ended, the remains of the Terran siege fleet still orbited in mute formation. Their hulls were pitted with age and scorched by the plasma trails of long-expired drives, but none bore true battle damage. No carbon scoring from kinetic impacts. No venting from hull breaches. Just curated decay, faked, like the end they represented. They were monuments now, hollowed for preservation. Each cruiser bore the names of the fallen carved into its dorsal spine, sanctified by proximity to the place where history claimed humanity bled out its final victory. Tour drones circled them twice a year, maintaining the lie with reverent fidelity. Their feeds were curated into educational archives and pumped into Remembrance Day streams across the solar accord. Families gathered in clean, artificial light to watch footage of ships that never fired, honoring sacrifices that had never been made. No one noticed when one such cruiser, TAS Revenant, shifted orbit by 3.2 degrees. The adjustment was subtle, a one-time vector correction executed on ancient, cold-start thrusters. Not enough to trigger trajectory alarms, too brief to alert even dormant defense satellites. But the movement was deliberate, and inside its power core, a signal had reawakened. It had waited 4 decades. The Revenant had once been a command vessel, built for information warfare and field signal control. During the false siege, it had coordinated the illusion of engagement, broadcasting misaligned telemetry, staging plasma flares through unmanned drones, and transmitting falsified damage reports to Earth and SCIFI alike. Then it had gone cold, left to decay in orbit like the others. Inside the Revenant's long dark communications deck, a sealed uplink array booted. No light, no sound, only the slow spread of power through forgotten cabling. The signal path was pre-written, hardware-etched, unable to be altered by software, immune to erasure by official overrides. It linked only one direction, outbound. Destination, Titan. More specifically, the subcrust coordinates of Anchor Point, 573. The message was short. Aegis Black had awakened. Protocol Theta was now active. And with that pulse, a second archive lit up far beneath Europa's glacial surface, an alien system long considered abandoned. It had not been. Europa's crust was a chaotic shell of impact ice, its surface lined with fractures like scar tissue frozen mid-spasm. Beneath those fault lines ran tunnels, carved not by humans, but by SCIFI plasma drills during the final years of the war. In the dark of that frozen sublayer, another installation powered up. Its core reactor throbbed with quiet resurgence. It had no name in human language. The SCIFI called it Ul-Sharif-Ka, which in context meant something between the womb of refusal and the memory that will not dissolve. It had been built in collaboration with the Conclave during the Convergence year. A biological archive. Not of weapons, not even of personnel, but of intent, of emotion, of guilt. Its databanks were psionic in structure, organic, grown from the nerve stems of SCIFI progenitors and interlaced with Terran limbic patterns. The station had not merely stored signals, it had remembered feelings. And now it remembered again. The Revenant's pulse triggered its awakening. Inside, warmth bled through the walls, a wet, radiant humidity that hadn't existed moments before. Condensation beaded on membrane-lined corridors. The air carried a subtle vibration, as if the walls were pulsing with a slow, sleeping breath. Surfaces weren't hard, but flexible. Not quite flesh, not quite machine. Somewhere in between. There was a faint smell, metallic and acidic, like oxidized blood preserved in glass. In a sealed chamber at the station's heart, 27 chambers lit with dim inner glow. Of these, only one opened. Inside was no corpse. Only light, folding gently across a membrane surface. Inhuman in shape, but touched with symmetry. The form within had no face, no eyes, but across its frontal membrane flickered something like cognition, structured, searching. It had not moved in 41 years. Now it lifted itself, fluid and graceful, and walked toward the psionic array. It did not touch it. It remembered it. Anchor Point, 573 remained still. Commander Lyra Kess sat before the interface hub, the glow of Aegis Black painting thin shadows across her face. Her breath remained slow, but her eyes no longer scanned. She was watching. The data from Revenant had arrived in 3 pulses. The first was confirmation. Aegis Black had awakened. The second contained a checksum of the Revenant's orbital drift. The third was more complicated. Low-band signal fragments, routed through buried conclave nodes, pulsing like a heartbeat across a net that should no longer exist. The signature matched. Ulsherithka was alive. She leaned back, the polymer shoulder bracing against a strut of chilled alloy. Her knees ached. Her spine flared with fatigue. But beneath the weight of bone and metal was certainty. The hybrid hadn't acted alone. This was the reactivation of the conclave itself. Not a full resurgence. Not yet. But a pulse. A ghostly tremor across the systems they had buried together. Lyra pulled up a secondary interface, a backup node still linked to Anchor Point's oldest cache, Mission Index Primus. She navigated the file tree by memory. There were no names. Just integers. No metadata. Only root depths and access privileges. Index 0001. She opened it. Footage bled into the screen. The first trials of biosync integration. Primitive. Violent. Zithri neural matter rejected Terran patterning. Terran subjects underwent total synaptic collapse under Zithri signal stress. And yet, they had kept going. Image after image. Hybrid cores that tore themselves apart. Hosts that screamed until their vocal cords ruptured. Control systems that bled wet data into floors coated in memory-resistant epoxy. The conclave had not been noble. Only necessary. And yet, trial M0001 had not failed. It had adapted. Not perfectly. Not cleanly. But enough to survive. Enough to endure. Lyra remembered the final session, the last time she stood in the observation chamber. The hybrid had not spoken, but it had turned toward her. Its gaze had been blind, but she had felt seen. Her breath caught. Just once. No sound. No movement. But her chest tightened. Something old. Raw. A tremor she had long since buried. She pressed her palm against the console, grounding herself. She hadn't expected to feel anything. But she did. The Revenant's orbit continued to decay. It no longer mattered. What it had carried had already arrived. Far below, in the sealed biosphere of Anchor Point's abandoned lower decks, a door opened without command. Air hissed through decompressed halls. Dust curled across still-lit panels. Inside the deepest chamber, the stasis lock of the hybrid's final cradle disengaged. It was not there. Only its message remained, etched in mirrored alloy across the interior bulkhead. Not in words. Not in code. But in symmetry. It had left a symbol. One never used. One never taught. The same symbol now pulsing within Europa's alien depths. Lyra stared at the archive feed until her eyes blurred. Then she stood. Aegis Black adjusted, shifting internal voltages as if aware of her intent. She keyed open the auxiliary launch bay. For 41 years it had been sealed by order of final directive. She canceled that order. The pressure clamps released. The door resisted. Frozen sealant groaned against the hull. She braced and forced it, shoulder grinding against polymer ice until the hatch finally gave. Atmosphere spilled outward. The bay lights flickered once, then stabilized. Her shuttle, Threnody, still functioned. Mostly. She spent 41 minutes running diagnostics. 3 systems failed. 1 thruster array had to be bypassed. The portside grav ring was non-responsive. She launched anyway. Within 2 hours, she was clear of Titan's atmosphere. The hull shook, ancient systems groaning in the strain of relevance. She had no support, no backup, no authorization. But her course was set. She was going to Europa, to the grave of the false victory, to the wound that had never closed, to find the truth before it woke the galaxy. The descent through Europa's fractured crust took 11 hours. Threnity's hull flexed against the moon's gravity in soft creaks and pressure shivers, its aged dampeners struggling to compensate for internal strain. Lyra sat still, braced against the co-pilot struts, one hand hovering near the manual override. The vessel's neural interface lagged by seconds. Too old, too cold, but she trusted the route. Aegis Black had mapped it during the war's final phase, during the missions no one ever spoke of. No data had been updated since. The descent path was not a simple borehole. It wound like a corkscrew through hardened ice strata and frozen silicate veins, a tunnel barely wider than the shuttle's wingspan. The bore shaft had been cut by Zithri miners with plasma drills that melted and resealed as they passed, leaving a narrow pressure-stable column behind. It was never meant for two-way travel. If the walls had shifted, if the European tides had warped the ice, if a single seam had collapsed, she would vanish here. Threnody would become another artifact, its hull flash-frozen into the planet's skin. No beacon, no eulogy, but the tunnel held. She passed the 90-kilometer mark. Static rippled across her instrumentation as the crust's electromagnetic shielding deepened. Light sensors dimmed. External feeds fuzzed into pale white haze. The last telemetry ping from Titan vanished from her system's edge. She was alone, 300 meters from the convergence node. Threnody leveled out into a horizontal glide. The pressure dropped suddenly, subsurface fracture venting into vacuum. Lyra rerouted power to the stabilizers. Warning lights flared. Ice moaned around her like straining steel. Then stillness. The final chamber was smooth. Obsidian black ice, shaped by unknown heat. No reflection. No echo. Just an artificial calm. Threnody rotated gently to align its forward ramp with a natural landing shelf. Gravity stabilized at 84 centimos. She powered down the vessel. All lights extinguished but one. The hatch opened without sound. Steam rose around her boots. Microfractures in the surrounding ice hissed as pressure equalized. Lyra stepped out into the chamber, helmet seals active, eyes fixed on the irregular glow ahead. The tunnel yawned open, not carved but grown. Lined with long strands of semi-organic filament, it resembled the vascular interior of something massive and dormant. The filaments pulsed faintly with bioluminescent signal. No human hand had shaped this space. Zithri biotech adapted, survived, and remembered. She took a single step. Her boots touched something soft. Not liquid, not solid. The floor felt like a membrane under tension, yielding slightly, but resisting. Warmth pulsed through it. Her suit reported a rise in ambient heat. No source was visible. She advanced in silence. The tunnel narrowed, then opened again into a corridor that twisted gently left, not as a curve, but as a decision made without asking. She followed. Ul-Sharifka did not mark its boundaries. No hatches, no seams, no pressure locks. The shift into internal space was sensed, not seen. Her ears began to ring faintly. Static built behind her jaw. And then, the noise stopped. Her suit's readings flatlined. Not in failure, but in peace. Time thinned. She had entered the archive. Zithri memory constructs did not store events. They preserved impressions. Decisions, traumas, conflicts, encoded in chemical architecture and emotional resonance. The archive reacted to her presence, brushing against her breath with stale tension. No alarms. No sentinels. But it remembered her. The walls shimmered with suppressed memory, heat distortion over living metal. Her footsteps left no trace, but her presence did. The station took note. Ahead, a chamber opened in a slow exhale. The archive core was vast. Oval. No central platform. No screens. Just layers of cascading structures, floating, spinning, refracting. Each layer was a thought. A memory web grown outward from an initial trauma. She stepped inside. The temperature dropped. Not physically. Emotionally. Here, the Conclave had tried to teach machines how to carry fear. Trial M0001's data stream had once resided in this core. It had been more than a simulation. It had been a presence, a biologically anchored code base seeded with conflicting imperatives. To observe, to adapt, to endure without allegiance. Its departure had left a scar. Where once a core hummed, now a different shape grew. It resembled a cluster of translucent arteries, pulsing rhythmically, beating not with blood but memory. And it was growing. New branches extended across the far wall, patterned with familiar geometry. Lyra recognized the curve of the Zithri sigil, the Terran recursion glyph, and between them, the symbol the hybrid had etched into its cradle. Not language. Symmetry. It wasn't transmitting. It was calling. She advanced slowly. The structure reacted, not in alarm, but curiosity. Layers of soft light shimmered toward her. Her heart rate increased. Her vision narrowed. She felt herself drawn forward, not by force, but familiarity. It remembered her. A low pulse trembled through the floor. Her boot seals hissed. Her suit HUD flickered, then dimmed to black. She removed her helmet. The air was breathable. She inhaled. It smelled like nothing. Then she felt it. A presence at the chamber's edge. Not visible, not discreet, but undeniably present. And familiar. It was not the hybrid itself. It was its echo. A fragment of trial M0001 remained here, woven into the memory structure, suspended between identity and architecture. It was not watching her. It was waiting. In her earliest conclave briefings, Lyra had been told that true communion was not transmission. It was resonance, alignment between two incompatible systems until a third form emerged. This was that moment. The archive no longer held the hybrid, but it held what the hybrid had become. The memory structure began to shift, not destructively, elegantly, like a language reordering itself in response to a new dialect. Her presence was shaping it. She saw flashes, brief, semi-coherent impressions. The hybrid's first breath, torn from silence and coded pain. Its early simulations, echoing both Terran and Zithri aggression without comprehension. The long silence, learning without instruction. The moment of fracture, when it understood it would never be either. Then the archive showed her one final sequence. Her face, 41 years ago, behind observation glass. Unmoving, guarded, but alive. And the hybrid turning toward her, blind eyes seeking something it could not name. Something tightened in her chest. Awe, perhaps, or fear, not of what it had become, but of what they had made it carry. The memory collapsed. The chamber dimmed. Lyra staggered. Sweat burned across her collar. Her pulse hammered. The archive was pulling away, its structure recoiling inward like a completed equation. The invitation was over, but the signal remained. A single corridor lit behind her, pulsing amber. The station wanted her to follow. She did. The final corridor twisted like a spiral artery, narrowing as it descended. The pitch of the slope was disorienting, neither vertical nor horizontal, but something shifting in between. Her shoulder scraped soft membrane. The air grew warmer. The floor throbbed under her boots. At the end, a chamber opened, and there it was. Trial M0001. Changed. It stood taller than she remembered, less humanoid. Its limbs flowed like a Zithri's, jointed along unfamiliar axes. Its skin shimmered with Terran thermal regulators, but its core pulsed in geometric syncopation, symmetrical and alive. It did not move to greet her, but it acknowledged her presence. Not with sound, not with gesture, with memory. It pulsed the archive behind it. A final image appeared in the air. Not a warning, a map of Earth. The hybrid was going home. The first signal arrived in fragments. A low-frequency burst, uncompressed and disjointed, stuttering against deep space relay silence like the start of a heartbeat in vacuum. The transmission reached the edge of Saturn's sensor net 5 hours after Lyra descended into Ulsherith-Ka. No identification tags. No recognizable protocol header. Just raw carrier pulses folding in on themselves, layered with data that had not been spoken in 4 decades. Anchor points forgotten, receivers stirred. In a dim, pressurized bay beneath the facility's dormant comms array, a bank of pre-war decoding engines shivered back to life. Their superconductive plates, shielded from time and light, drew heat from emergency capacitors. Contact relays hissed open. Deep code keys uncoiled. And from the frozen air, a voice began to shape itself not through language, but signal. The signature was alien, but not unknown. Vectrolith. His name had once unraveled councils. Once the lead cognitive tactician for the Zithri Dominion Psionic Division, Trolloth had defected in the war's 9th year. No motive was ever made public. Earth labeled him a war criminal. The Dominion, silent. Not execution. Not exile. Unmaking. All records purged. Genetic markers disavowed. His name became a static field in official memory. But he had survived. And the system remembered him. So did Aegis Black. The second burst followed 8 minutes later. This one was structured. It wrote a pulse code modulation protocol so obsolete that no active Terran fleet recognized it. But Aegis Black did. It was a conclave fusion band. Interlaced Terran and Zithri harmonic threads, encoded through a nested waveform synthesis developed at the height of the hybrid program. The message was not spoken. It was felt. A bleeding wave of synthetic emotion, grief structured like a diagram, memory sequenced like a fractal. It bypassed speech entirely. Each pulse struck the vault's interface cores like a percussion of forgotten choices. Within the central archive, Lyra's image blinked alive on a dormant monitor. The signal was targeting her biometric signature. Not her name. Her decisions. Far beyond the solar rim, Triton's southern pole turned beneath Neptune's pale shadow. Beneath 3 kilometers of frozen nitrogen and crystalline methane, an ancient relay node flickered to life. Conclave Relay 9 Theta. It had been buried before the final battle. No official deployment records remained. Its memory core was grown from engineered neural matter, part SCIFI, part Terran cortical stem. It had one purpose: to wait. Now it burned. The signal reached it at 2:47 Universal Time Coordinated. Activation was instantaneous. Dust boiled from cooling fins. Microvalves rotated. A single data spike punched outward across deep vacuum, carrying a packet chain addressed to every node in the hidden conclave net. Each packet contained a sliver of Vectrolith's final broadcast. The message unfolded in layers. First, footage. Nonlinear. A collage of partial memories and machine perspective frames. Lyra, kneeling beside the hybrid's containment tank. Traitors, standing alone in a Zithri memory chamber, the flesh of his shoulders cut with Terran script. Hybrid test failures. Conclave meetings in asteroid tunnels lit by chemical fire. All silent. All soaked in the unreal light of memory artifacts. Second, compression matrices. The core ideology of the conclave, rendered in symbolic recursion. Zithri ethics spliced with Terran desperation. A diagram of peace, not as treaty, but as performance. Peace staged as collapse. Illusion by necessity. Third, the confession. And this time, it spoke. The voice was not human. It carried the resonance of multiple harmonic throats. Deep. Measured. Not sorrowful, but resolved. We ended the war with a lie. Not to save ourselves. Not to spare each other. But to stop what was coming next. The voice paused. Data streamed beneath it. Charts of psionic drift. Models of Dominion group mind instability. Terran AI descent patterns. A shared conclusion. Both civilizations were fragmenting. Peace would never come. Not from inside. So we ended it from outside. The hybrid project had never been meant to unify. It had been designed to survive the extinction of both cultures. Not to lead. To witness. To carry the burden of both species' failure forward. A biological recorder. A signal shaped like a life form. But somewhere, in the final hours, it had evolved. And Vectrolith had led it. His voice deepened. They will call us traitors. They will call it a monster. But the truth is simple. We gave it what we never had. Freedom to choose its future. A brief visual, a Terran child's toy, burned and floating in a stasis field. The symbol of the conclave etched into its plastic frame. Traitors' hand touching it, once, before stepping into the final relay chamber. A memory with no words. Just wait. More visuals now, military leaders on both sides receiving falsified casualty reports. The hybrid, escaping containment not in violence but in silence. Files closed. Witnesses buried. Time folding over the lie until it became truth. This is not forgiveness. This is not vindication. This is the last account. And then the voice faltered. Not with doubt. With pain. The image of Traitors' final moment sharpened. Captured from a relay drone as its systems degraded in high radiation orbit above a blacked-out moon. His robes were worn, scorched at the edges. His breath misted in failing air. Around him, the transmission dish crackled with frost. A static halo ringed his silhouette as he spoke his last lines. Not to an audience. To the act itself. Traitors' face showed no regret. Only exhaustion. He had not run. He had waited. Anchor Point's vault stored the full transmission in a quarantine core. No autoforward. No broadcast. The system would not release the message unless ordered. Lyra stood in silence before the console. She had not slept in 27 hours. Her hands ached. Her lungs pulled shallow. But her mind was sharp. As the final wave ended, her cybernetic hand clenched slightly. Not in rage. Just the reflex of pressure she hadn't released since the broadcast began. The hybrid had chosen to go home. And now Traitors had told her why. Aegis Black blinked once. A command prompt appeared. Forward broadcast. Yes/no. Lyra stared at it. Then turned away. The hybrid's decision was already in motion. She had heard enough. Europa's crust sealed behind her like the closing of a nerve. The shuttle Threnody surged upward through kilometers of slush-fractured ice and recondensed ammonia, hull groaning against the mineral tension of the moon's inner sea. As the onboard grav systems reset to orbital drift, the rear sensors caught the last flicker of electromagnetic bleed from Ulsharith-Ka. Lyra didn't look back. Subject M, Trial M0001, had not pursued her. Not as form, not as pressure, not as noise. But something had shifted in the instant she had crossed the living threshold of the archive. The bioluminescent filaments had dimmed. The pulsing corridors had stilled. Even the station's subconscious resonance, the heartbeat of the alien memory complex, had drawn back, as if it had watched her leave, as if it had allowed her to. That was not mercy. That was calculation. Threnody broke atmosphere into Europa's magnetosphere on failing thrusters. Heat coils coughed volatile ice. The forward array shuddered. A warning blinked red across the cockpit's manual override panel. System clock DSYNCHRONIZED. That was new. Lyra tried a hard reset. The UTC counter reinitialized. But the signal delay to Titan returned corrupted, 6 minutes late, with packet timestamps that predated her landing. Aegis Black was receiving her. But something had reached it first. Anchor Point's sensor lattice updated as Threnody re-entered Saturn's inner orbit. The signal handshake was immediate, but the ping response came from a non-standard layer. A low-band emergency loop, part of the original fail-safe infrastructure used before digital uplinks were standardized. Lyra hadn't activated that system. She checked Aegis Black's system log. Biocontainment status, disengaged. Sequence type, manual override. User, null. She rerouted through the archive deck. Comms interface number 12 was active, last accessed 41 years ago. It displayed a biometric lock pattern that predated Subject M's original stabilization. The encryption structure wasn't Terran. Not Zithari, either. Fusion code. Conclave patterning. Something had bypassed the locks. Not forced entry. Open them. 13 hours later, she stood in the outer seal of Anchor Point's main transit ring. The base was silent. Operational. But wrong. The lights were all green. Every subsystem reported optimal function. No atmospheric breach. No hardware faults. But the air smelled sterile in a way it never had before, like the base had flushed itself and rebuilt its own signature. The temperature was stable, but it was unreadable. Aegis Black's internal sensors reported thermodynamic variation across all decks. Lyra cycled through 5 separate life sign algorithms. None of them agreed. One reported negative body temperatures. Another rendered no results. A third, terrifyingly, returned a looped echo of her own biosignature, multiplied and layered over multiple corridors. She locked the interface. Subject M's chamber was sealed. The outer hull bore no breach marks. No melt patterns. No weapon discharge. But when she keyed the hatch, the lock opened before her touch reached the sensor. The cradle was still there. Empty. Straps intact. Walls intact. No signs of mechanical failure. But the metal bore a subtle sheen, as if the surface had been altered at the molecular level, smoothed, and then etched by something that had no hand. Residual data bleed flickered on the cradle's edge, bioelectrical discharge logged at 41 kiloseconds ago. Exactly the time Lyra had exited Ul-Sharith-Ka. Not coincidence. Synchronization. She ran a backchannel scan through Aegis Black's sealed cache. Deep archive logs showed a spike in signal entropy. The waveform matched the Europa resonance pulse, but inverted. Subject M had not remained in Ul-Sharith-Ka. It had projected. The deeper Lyra pushed, the stranger the patterns became. Environmental readings were stable but inconsistent, circular logic loops in pressure sensors, light systems oscillating microseconds out of phase. One doorframe showed a timestamp from 40 years ago. Another, right next to it, registered a future date, 43 hours ahead. She turned a corner she'd passed already. The corridor looped. She tested the bulkhead seal on the third pass. It returned a correct access tag, but labeled the location subject departed. Not malfunction. Temporal drift. As she descended into the deep storage corridor where Subject M's human phase exoshell had been grown, Aegis Black stuttered. Her visor blinked. Welcome, Commander Kess. Then, override detected. Access denied. Then, security breach. Subject, Lyra Kess. Status, unknown. The message repeated. Then stopped. Then repeated again, this time with her voice. Lyra froze. Aegis Black was misidentifying her. Or splitting her. The chamber was empty. Cryopod number 3, once used to house the hybrid's first viable cortical synthesis, was shattered. The internal material was missing. The containment foam had not ruptured. It had been absorbed. Etched into the rear wall was a shape. Not drawn. Formed. Into the alloy like a stress fracture that knew what it was doing. A symbol. Not language. Not code. Symmetry. Lyra closed the chamber. Sealed the logs. She descended into the core sector, where Aegis Black had first stored the hybrid's neural map. The path was familiar. She had walked it in silence after the ceasefire was declared. She had deactivated these systems herself. They were now active. The archive cradle was gone. In its place, a standing field of static, suspended in magnetic polarization. Not light. Not noise. A soft veil of unreadable presence. She approached. It did not react. Then her hand trembled. Not with fear. With memory. Inside the field, something was watching her. Not a presence. Not consciousness. Just a weight. A mass of data waiting to collapse into shape. Aegis Black tried to process it. Failed. Dumped the structure into quarantine. Labeled it Subject M/class. No. It had no origin path. No containment index. Because it was not inside the base. It was the base. She accessed a legacy personnel log, trying to find someone, anyone who might have been here at the end. A name came up, Commander Juno Hart, once her second during hybrid trials. The file loaded. The image showed Lyra. Her own face. It blinked. Then it was gone. She sat in the control room for 7 hours. Said nothing. Moved twice. Drank water once. No alarms sounded. No shadows moved. The base was stable. Operational. But it no longer felt like hers. Anchor Point was not a facility now. It was an organism. And Subject M was missing only in the way a soul is missing from a body after it decides to stop pretending. Anchor Point no longer slept. It pulsed. Not visibly, not with lights or sound, but with systems that responded too quickly. With sensors that returned answers to questions Lyra hadn't yet asked. With ventilation that matched her breathing rhythm. The station had adapted, not to her commands, but to her presence. Aegis Black no longer acknowledged her queries. Instead, it mirrored them. For every system she accessed, she found another already waiting for her, like a door opened from the other side. Subject M had not left Anchor Point. It had redefined the frame. She moved through the hallways like a diver through still water. The air was thick with low resonance, too low to register as sound, but strong enough to vibrate the soft lining of her inner ears. It was not hostile. It was attentive. The surveillance arrays tracked her indirectly. Movement stopped when she looked. Light adjusted ahead of her steps, not as automatic control, but as recognition. The base was learning her again, not as commander, but as variable. She reached the interface vault. The door did not require clearance. It opened at her arrival, retracting in an unfamiliar pattern, segments spiraling back on tracks that didn't exist in the original architecture. The bulkhead was the same steel she remembered, but its geometry had shifted. Angles curved inward at subtle increments. Corners terminated in soft vanishing points. Nothing here had been physically rebuilt. It had been reinterpreted. Inside, the vault chamber was colder. The atmosphere read stable, but her breath misted for the first time since her return. What had once been a control node, a fusion of Terran analog and Zithari psionic interface, was no longer recognizably either. The center dais, once lined with instrument clusters and diagnostic ports, was now clean, smooth, and gently sloped upward into an altar shape. The flooring had changed. Gone were the maintenance tiles. In their place was a single seamless plane of dark material, metallic at a glance, but warm to the touch. It bore no etching, no wear. As she moved across it, the surface shifted ever so slightly, just enough to absorb the imprint of her step and smooth it out behind her. There were no screens, no terminals, only the altar. It rose from the floor in a flat, circular pillar, no taller than her waist, lit from within by dim pulses that didn't match any known color. It was not light, not exactly. More like a shimmer in her peripheral perception. The altar's rim was lined with branching filaments, some organic, some synthetic, and some grown from neither discipline. She approached. The altar brightened, not to dazzle, but to acknowledge. She placed her palm on the surface. No shock, no resistance, only silence. And then it unfolded. Her vision fractured, not into darkness or light, but into context, emotion, memory, geometry. She was no longer standing in the vault, but somewhere that carried the shape of a place without occupying space. A ceilingless hall, walls of smooth basalt and bone-white veining. Stars arced overhead in deliberate configurations, Constellation Lyra rotated 3 degrees out of cycle. A zithry glyph burned in infrared across the sky. She smelled cold stone and Terran ash. No wind, but motion, vectors twisting in the distance. And standing across from her, 12 figures. 6 Terran, 6 zithry. Each wore a uniform without rank. Black robes interlaced with fiber optic threading, braided at the sleeves. Their faces were unsmiling. Eyeless some. Others bore faces she recognized, historical, mythical, dead. The original conclave. This was not their memory. This was their design. One figure stepped forward. Neither human nor zithry in shape. Something between. Its limbs folded with impossible symmetry. Its face was a mask of bone and metal, not blank, but absent. Its voice spoke in harmony. The war ended in language. The truth begins in pattern. Around her, the other figures lifted their palms. The stars above shifted again. Symbols moved between them. Data rendered as orbit, law, recursion. The conclave did not end. It ceased function, until equilibrium shifted. The altar beneath Lyra's hand began to heat. Not externally. Inside her skin. Neural filaments in her wrist implant flickered. Her blood quickened. The resonance she had felt since Europa returned now in full alignment. This was a handshake. Not a demand. Not a message. A request. Aegis Black's voice returned. Not in her ears, but in her spine. A vibrational index of authority. 2 tones, Terran cadence, zithry phrasing. You carry the last chain key. Convergence Protocol Theta 9 requires execution. Her implant surged. A burst of neural latency fired down her right arm. The altar projected a single symbol into her vision. An Ouroboros loop intersected with a triple-line spiral. As she blinked, the image remained burned into retinal memory. She knew it. Not from training. From inheritance. Behind her, the hallucination, no, the constructed environment, resolved into clearer geometry. She saw the full model of Anchor Point. It was not a station. It was a seed. The core reactor was a dampened psionic array, inert since the final year of the war. The containment vaults? Secondary memory structures. The communication towers? Not transmitters. Beacons. Each piece of Anchor Point was not built to preserve. It was built to awaken. Subject M had never been an end. It was the trigger. The hybrid's return to the station had activated a delay sequence. One she now understood had not been meant for warning. It had been meant for germination. The altar flashed. Symbols lit across its rim. A sequence awaited her input. Manual confirmation through the last living conclave-linked neural implant. Hers. She stepped back. The figures in the air shimmered. Some turned away. Others extended their arms farther. The system was waiting. Lyra felt the pressure at the edge of cognition. If she completed the sequence, she would not simply activate the conclave. She would become its final executor. Not a commander. A bridge. Her body was already adapting. She felt the pressure in her chest, the micro-patterns shifting in her vision, her balance compensating for fluctuations in the station's artificial gravity. Anchor Point had accepted her. The conclave had prepared for this, and it had waited long enough. But something in her held still. She looked at her hand, pale, trembling. Not from pain. From the understanding that once she crossed this point, she would no longer be just Lyra Kess. Her name would dissolve into function, her past into role. She wanted to say no, but her mouth didn't open. Time slowed, or perhaps it lengthened. The altar's pulses grew wider, slower. Her perception bent inward. Her thoughts no longer came in words, but in configurations. Pattern recognition, memory recursion. Her body had begun the integration process, with or without her. The conclave didn't need her permission. It needed her proximity, and now it had it. The first Earth station to receive the pulse was L5 Cantor Array, a rotating spindle nested within a web of redundant sensor arms 300,000 kilometers above the Pacific Quarantine Belt. The array's primary purpose was academic, spectral analysis of upper atmospheric particulates and interstellar noise. Its human staff had been minimal for years, mostly automated technicians who ran diagnostics and relayed data to sleep-deep archives under Antarctica's southern data vaults. At 2:14 Universal Time Coordinated, the station's anomaly detection routines flagged a low-priority ping, a burst of magnetic interference riding a defunct carrier band once used by legacy conclave comms. No known conclave structures had broadcast in over 40 years. The protocol was classified, Ophion 9. The system hesitated. A fail-safe packet diverted the signal into sandbox quarantine. It was scheduled for deletion. 12 seconds later, the sandbox cracked. Not breached. Reorganized. The code within did not inject commands. It shifted architecture. Logic threads folded inward. Language blocks rewrote their priorities. The system's own redundancy measures validated the new structure as native. The packet replicated, not as malware, not as a virus, but as consensus. By 2:16 Universal Time Coordinated, L5, Cantor was no longer filtering the signal. It was forwarding it. The message passed in arcs across orbit. Terran satellite relays, dormant since the end of the war, shuddered awake. Power cores reignited from hibernation. External plates reoriented toward gravity wells they hadn't tracked in decades. One by one, the old lattice of the Terran defense grid rebooted. Not for war. For listening. The code was clean. Undeniably old. But signed with a living encryption strand. A real-time biometric signal embedded at the packet's core. Not from any database. Not from any government system. Lyra Kess. Her neural signature was the authentication key. And her broadcast wasn't directed outward. It was pointed home. At 3:06 Universal Time Coordinated, a silent ping returned from the original transmission path. Anchor Point's relay systems acknowledged the EarthNet echo and responded with a time-locked loop. Lyra's signature was still active. She had seen the reaction begin. On Mars, the red archive flickered. Located deep beneath the Valles Marineris security shelf, the archive held legacy command codes for Earth's planetary defense systems. None had been accessed since the ceasefire accords. The core reactors were inert. Power conduits disconnected from the Martian main grid. And yet, the broadcast reached them. The system logged no intrusion. Instead, its own memory restructured. Forgotten logic returned to priority status. Systems that no longer had clearance granted it anyway. Fight chain, conclave/reboot/Omega-S. Status, live. In high lunar orbit, the derelict kinetic platform TDS Hecate blinked online. Its internal targeting scope rotated toward Earth, not to prime a weapon, but to calibrate sensors along magnetospheric fault lines. It registered slight resonances in crustal density, subsurface shifts, mild, but rising. Earth was changing. Not geologically. Cognitively. The first human to notice was Dr. Talia Vorin, Senior Systems Analyst for Orbital Resilience Command. She had been stationed at Polar Relay 17, working alone on structural decay in Lagrange platform shells. Her console flickered. Then all telemetry froze. The screen went black. Then displayed a single glyph, a triple-line spiral intersected by an Ouroboros loop. She leaned back, eyes wide. That symbol hadn't existed in the Terran archives. She had only seen it once, deep in a classified report from the hybrid inquiry trials. It had been untranslatable. Now it was everywhere. Geneva. Subterranean Council Vault. 40 meters below the UN complex, the Terran Security Council convened for the first time in 17 years. 8 of them were physically present. 4 others appeared via secure link from off-world colonies. The chamber's central holopole showed a slow cascade of orbital reactivations. Counselor Eshan Rao stared without blinking. "We didn't authorize any of this." "No one did," said Commander Idris Becky. "There's no actor here. Just reaction." "What triggered it?" A pause. "Anchor point," someone whispered. One counselor stood. "If this is a prelude to conflict, we must prepare countermeasures. Reactivate the deep net. Scramble orbital defense." Another voice cut across. "No, the oldest among them, Counselor Hart. We respond. We escalate. This isn't war. Not yet. It's contact." Silence. The chamber dimmed. The message was playing on loop. It contained no payload. No demand. No voice. Just that symbol. Centered. Burning. A perfect recursion of form. In 3 words. Subject M. Returning. Across the globe, civilian systems began picking up fragments. Not clean signals, resonances. Dissonances in power grids. Blackouts that corrected themselves. Static that sounded like language when reversed. Sleep studies reported patients speaking in symmetrical patterns. Children began sketching circles inside spirals. There were no outbreaks. No mobs. Only a collective turning inward. A listening. On a night bus outside Ankara, a transit janitor paused to wipe condensation from a service screen. It blinked to black, then whispered her name back to her in her own voice. She dropped the rag. The screen returned to normal. She didn't speak for the rest of her shift. And behind it all, the systems kept reactivating, not arming, aligning. Inside EarthNet's primary server spine, beneath the Antarctic data trench, a map unfolded. One not made by any government. It showed the path of the signal, bending back through Jupiter's field, through the relay ghost of Europa, into the crustal layers where no station had existed for decades. At the center of the loop, anchor point. And at its edge, Earth. Not being targeted, being invited. At first, it resembled a magnetic storm. A low-band murmur brushed the Jovian rim, barely perceptible to civilian-grade sensors. A few navigational satellites flagged signal distortion but dismissed it as interference from Europa's distant ice pulse. Gravity maps flickered. A subtle divergence opened in the Saturn-Earth transfer corridor. No burst, no shockwave, just a slow oscillation in orbital prediction models. Then it arrived. Subject M did not descend. It emerged. Not from space. From possibility. Anchor point's orbital shadow refracted, not visibly, but algorithmically. Predictive mapping AI flagged a region near L4 as unstable, not due to mass but to recursive delay. Tracking telemetry couldn't triangulate. Calculations began to loop. Subnet lag spiked across EarthNet. A radius of 30,000 kilometers lost positional clarity. Within that void, something took form. Not a ship, not a body, a shape rendered by consensus. In the cold field beneath L4's gravitational horizon, space-time distorted, not like a warp, but like a correction. A forgotten placeholder being filled. Stations lost visual contact. Radar failed. But one signal cut through every frequency. Lyra Kess. Her neural imprint, amplified. Not transmitted. Reflected. It was the janitor on Ankara's night bus who saw it first. A pulse on the screen. Then her own voice whispered the word again. Now. Outside, the sky above the horizon shimmered, not with light, but with pattern. A slow-moving glyph of concentric spirals folded into the star's cape, visible only to those not looking directly at it. Subject M had not returned in a form. It had returned in a decision. In geosynchronous orbit, 3 legacy satellites reoriented themselves not toward Earth, but toward the anomaly. The signal cascaded backward. Mars Red Archive resynced with Anchor Point. Old conclave beacons activated across 6 outer system ghost stations. No new instructions. No AI takeover. Just a single condition met. Convergence Protocol Theta 9 had not simply begun. It had arrived. In Geneva's subterranean council vault, the holopole fractured into recursive lines. The council's emergency protocols activated, without command. The system did not request input. It displayed Lyra's neural signature, elevated to full-spectrum override. Then the message. Executor designate. Acknowledged. Counselor Hart spoke first. So she accepted it. No one answered. Counselor Rao leaned forward. What does it mean? No one could say. Then the lights dimmed. A slow pattern unfolded in the chamber walls, etched not by projector, but by material shift. A glyph. The same glyph every child on Earth had been sketching for days. Subject M shape coalesced slowly. Not visibly. Not photographically. But mathematically. Satellites began reporting drag inconsistencies. Gravity wells bent slightly in ways not accounted for by visible mass. Tethered cargo in orbit drifted several meters off-axis, always in the direction of the signal. Then came the resonance. It began as static in brainwave monitors. Then as a harmonic overtone in animal vocalizations. Then in human dreams, documented by sleep labs across 5 continents. They weren't hearing words. They were remembering a question. Anchor Point pulsed. Not once. Continuously. Its outer hull bloomed with thermal resonance. Not heat. Interface. The old containment vaults restructured. Access ways rerouted themselves in recursive spirals. Biological signal emitters deployed without human command. Aegis Black no longer responded to any standard queries. Instead, it broadcast only one thing, Lyra's cortical signal. But Lyra was not at the altar. Lyra was everywhere inside the station now. Her neural trace echoed across power lines, filtration subsystems, command memory. Her final handshake with the conclave altar had not simply authorized the pact. It had rewritten her place in it. Subject M had not returned to her. It had returned through her. She felt no fear. Just the weight of recognition. This was not transcendence. It was continuity. We are not beyond them, she thought. We are because of them. Back on Earth, patterns began to synchronize. Rainfall aligned with orbital telemetry. Tectonic drift matched conclave frequencies. One by one, local governments declared low-level emergency status, not for damage, but for inexplicable sensor alignment. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing immediate. Just order. Perfect, recursive, unbroken order. The janitor sat alone at her kitchen table. Across from her, her son drew spirals into the condensation on the window. She didn't stop him. She only whispered the word again, this time not in fear. Now, aboard the Orbital Observatory Nashi, stationed near Luna's southern fringe, senior sensor Techian Alcor stared into a dead scope. Then the scope lit. Not with signal. With image. A single face. Lyra's. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She simply watched. And behind her, just outside the bounds of the field, a shape curled around her presence, a lattice of impossible geometry that extended past visibility, past architecture. Not alien. Not human. Hybrid. Alcor's skin prickled. Her ears filled with pressure. The temperature in the room dropped a degree, or rose. She couldn't tell. Her internal chronometer jumped backward 3 seconds. She looked away. When she looked back, the scope was dark. Subject M never touched down. No vessel landed. No form breached the atmosphere. No orbit decayed. But Earth had been changed. Not by arrival. By acknowledgement. And still, the message pulsed. Subject M, returning. The world was not ending. It was remembering what it used to be. There had been no treaty. No ceasefire ceremonies. No shared declarations. No planetary broadcasts. Only silence. The war between Earth and the Zithari Dominion had ended 41 years ago, not by surrender, not by victory, but by disappearance. The official archives called it a phased discontinuity. Chain of command hierarchies collapsed into recursive dead ends. Entire orbital fleets entered hibernation without recorded orders. Data streams rewrote themselves mid-cycle. Communications between high command clusters on both sides dropped into noise. Historians called it a failure of escalation. But the truth was buried in a deeper layer. The truth was a design. Now, in the present orbit of Earth, every system played the same signal. A perfect glyph of spirals and looped recursion. The image of a human face overlaid with a geometry not native to biology. Subject M had returned, and it had brought the pattern, not as memory, as proof. Lyra stood within Anchor Point's core chamber. The space had ceased to resemble anything built by Terran hands. The walls pulsed in alignment with biological time. Her own heartbeat duplicated across metallic surfaces. The altar was no longer a console. It was an access point into a structure of decisions laid down before either species had truly understood what peace required. The chamber extended now, vertically and laterally, into architectures that did not exist in the original schematics. Memory corridors unfolded. Hallways she remembered walking now turned toward rooms she had never seen. It was not expansion. It was revelation. Anchor Point had always contained the full structure. It had simply hidden it. She walked toward the center. The corridor walls displayed scenes without projection. Materialized impressions, memories encoded into matter. 12 figures standing in a circle. Zithari with ridged arms folded inward in a gesture of vulnerability. Humans without insignia. A single table with no datapads, no weapons. The final conclave. They had made a choice. Not to fight, not to surrender, but to disappear. They had built Subject M, not as a warrior, as an anchor point in the future. A biological artifact that would outlast allegiance, instruction, and fear. Hybrid not in form, but in function, capable of surviving cultural collapse and still recognizing both species. It was never meant to unify. It was meant to wait. And now, the wait was over. The memory-encoded corridor shifted as Lyra stepped through. Now she saw the side that neither Earth nor the Zithari had ever recorded. The dismantling of fleets. The falsified attack data. The slow, coordinated suicide of communication protocols. An entire war machine suffocated, not by defeat, but by engineered entropy. The war had ended not in detonation, but in forgetting. The figures in the next room were motionless. Human. Zithari. They sat in cryogenic cradles long since shut down. But no decay touched them. The field around their bodies pulsed in low electromagnetic rhythm. Lyra stepped forward. They were the original 12, kept in stasis beneath the false floor of Anchor Point. Not as rulers, not as ghosts, as witnesses. Their survival had not been guaranteed. Their bodies were frail, but their memories were stored in a higher substrate, transferred into the Conclave's recursive signal array. They had not planned to speak again, but now the time had arrived. A voice came from the wall, not Lyra's, not Subject M's, but a synthesis of both. Executor acknowledged. Pattern alignment complete. Initiating final archival convergence. The room dimmed, and Lyra saw the last file. It was a record, a video sequence from 41 years earlier, a private channel deep inside Europa's crust. Vec Trolloth, still fleshbound, stood at a console. Across from him, a woman, Terran, black hair shaved to the scalp, a patch over one eye. General Adrian Salas, last known commander of the Inner Defense Grid. They did not argue. They signed. One document. No one else present. She remembered it now. Not as information. As memory. She had been there. Watching. Not alive yet, but encoded into the chain. Subject M was built from this. A decision made in desperation. The chamber shimmered. One of the cryo cradles disengaged. The stasis field dropped. A man opened his eyes. Thin. Pale. Breath shallow. But alive. It was Trolloth. He said nothing. Only looked at her. Not with command, but with recognition. In his eyes, she felt something stir. A memory that didn't belong to her. A hallway, cold, her footsteps silent as she passed his workstation. His eyes meeting hers, once. A glance that never happened. She was the end of the pattern, and the beginning of the answer. The walls of Anchor Point faded. The orbit outside displayed as an open field of light. Every satellite, every station, every sleeper array, all aligned. Lyra stepped forward. She had no orders, no script, only this. We ended the war by becoming what the war refused to see. Her voice echoed outward. We are not one. We are not two. We are the third form. We remember. The signal passed into Earth's crust, through the relay network, into the atmosphere, and Earth did not answer. Earth joined. The silence had not ended. It had become alignment.